Hello everybody, my name is Rami. I'm a tour guide from Bethlehem. And actually I live 2 minutes walk from where we are, which is the Shepherd's Field. I work with Verso Ministries, and today we have decided to take you on a short tour at the Shepherd's Field, especially that the place is empty. There is no pilgrims or tourists at all. Because of the circumstances that surround us nowadays. But since we are approaching the Christmas season, it would be nice actually to give you a short tour of the site where the declaration by the angel to the shepherds took place. When the angel appeared to the shepherds who were in the fields watching over their flocks and announced to them the birth of the long-awaited Messiah in the little town of Bethlehem, which is uphill, which is only like maybe a mile away from here. What you see behind me is the church at the Shepherd's Field, which is relatively a new church, and it was designed to look from outside like a Bedouin tent, because the architect, Antonio Barluzzi, who designed the church, had the picture in his mind that shepherds lived under tents, which is true, because many of the shepherds traveled from one place to another place back at that time. But also, today, we will get to show you a cave, which is according to one tradition, the place where the shepherds were when the angel appeared to them and announced to them the birth of the Messiah. It's an important thing to keep in our mind that the shepherds we're talking about were not the ordinary shepherds. These were the shepherds that were responsible to raise and take care of the lambs that were destined to be offered as sacrificial lambs at the temple in Jerusalem. The church is very simple from inside. If you look around me, there are 3 paintings at the church. The first one shows the angel declaring the birth of the Messiah, or the birth of Jesus, to the shepherds who are in the fields. The one behind me shows the shepherds visiting Jesus at the grotto of the Nativity, the place of his birth. And the other one shows the shepherds coming back to their fields, singing and dancing, spreading the good news to everybody after realizing that the long-awaited Messiah was born in the little town of Bethlehem. There is an interesting thing that you can see at these 3 paintings. If you look at the first one, at the lower left corner, you will get to see a dog. Shepherds always had dogs with them. The dog seems to be afraid from the angel, just like the shepherds, because the shepherds were afraid when they first saw the angel. You look at this one over here, at the lower right corner, you'll get to see the same dog with the shepherds at the grotto of the Nativity. If you look at the third one, you see the dog with the shepherds coming back to their fields, singing and dancing, and the dog seems to be smiling. So we have the dog at these 3 paintings. And the message the artist wanted to give us by having the dog at these 3 paintings is that the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, was a joy not only for humans, but for all creatures. That's why we have it at the three paintings. If you look up and see how the church was designed, as I said, it was designed to look like a Bedouin tent from outside. But if you look at the dome, you will get to see how the dome was designed with all these glass holes, that if you come around noontime and enter into the church, when the sun is very strong and vertical, you will get to see the sun lines coming through these glass holes into the church to give you the impression or the sense of the supernatural light that came out from the angel when he appeared to the shepherds. So what we see over here, this is one of the many natural caves that exist in this area over here. Actually, the whole Bethlehem and Jerusalem area is full of these natural caves. And it's so important for us to understand part of the first century culture. And we have to realize that most people back at that time lived in caves. For many of you who have been here, especially to the town of Capernaum, where Jesus lived, must have seen the built-up houses. So many people lived at houses, but most people, the poor people, lived in caves. So this is what we call, actually, back at that time, a cave house. Most families lived in these natural caves that are made out of the soft limestone. Till today, many people at the villages, especially the farmers, would use these caves as an extension to their homes. And they would use it either as a storeroom or a stable where they keep their flocks. But when we talk about the cave house in the first century, you have to understand one important thing, that the cave was divided into the main section of the cave, which is where the family lived, and the back of the cave, which served as the stable. Because back at that time, when the family went to sleep at night, they couldn't leave their most valuables, their flocks, whether there were sheep, goats, or cows, or whatever, outside. So they brought them inside the cave, especially in winter time, because the animals warmed the cave up. So the animals were brought at night and they were kept at the back of the cave. And that served as the stable. The family would be by the main entrance where the fresh air is, and the animals are kept at the back. This somehow helps us understand the Nativity story. Because for sure, Jesus was born in a cave that must have looked more or less like this one over here. But when we read the gospel narrative or the nativity narrative in Luke, it tells us there was no place for them at the inn. Now the word that is usually translated as inn in the Greek Gospels actually is kataluma, which means the guest room, which refers to the main section of the cave. And so you have to understand one important thing also in our culture, that Joseph had to come from Nazareth to Bethlehem to register, because he was from Bethlehem. And he had so many relatives living in Bethlehem. So it doesn't make any sense that Joseph would go and take Mary and try to find a room in an inn or a guest house to stay at. So he must have been hosted by one of his relatives who lived in Bethlehem, which was the custom back in those days. It was not accepted to allow a relative to stay in a different place or somewhere else. So people, or especially relatives, had to host each other. But the idea is that when Joseph came, Joseph and Mary, there was no place for them at the guest room, the kataluma, the living room, which is the main section of the cave. And so they were asked to move to the back of the cave, which is where the animals were. And that was the stable. And so that's where Jesus was born. So Jesus was born in what is called a cave house, but in that section of that cave house, which was considered to be the stable because that's where the animals were. So Jesus was born in a cave that must have looked more or less like this one over here. Anyways, according to one tradition, this was the cave where the shepherds were when the angel appeared to them and announced to them the birth of Jesus.